Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel for another clean with me video. This one might be a little bit longer as I'm getting the house ready for guests once again, and I'll be tackling some tasks that I had left to the wayside for a while. I figured I would start with clearing all the dishes that had piled up in the kitchen sink. We had unexpected guests last night just before we were supposed to head out, and so I never had a chance to clean up the dishes before leaving, and so I had last night's dishes that had piled up as well as some other pots and pans from breakfast this morning. So that's one thing with having a big sink. It's great for having the space to wash your dishes comfortably, but then when it gets filled, it really gets filled and it takes a little bit longer to wash all the dishes. There were some stains on the pan where we make our eggs in the morning that needed to be addressed, and so I sprinkled some baking soda to help me rub away those cooked on or caked on stain. And baking soda is great as it's abrasive enough to get rid of stains, but not too abrasive as to cause damage to the finishes. So even in like pots and pans, for example, or I'll use it in cleaning out my sink. So it's a great little tool if you need a little extra boost to help you scrub away any stains. And so with a little elbow grease, the inside of the pan was good as new. I also had some things that needed to be cleaned before being placed into the recycling bin. I'm not sure if anybody else does this, but I've heard that if you don't clean the items before placing them in the recycling, then they're tainted potentially with oil or other food items and they can't be recycled, and so they end up being tossed in the garbage. I wonder if anybody has first-hand experience with this and could let me know if this is true. Certain items such as knives, scissors, or anything wooden, I don't place in the dishwasher, and I like to wash those by hand because there's less wear and tear from the dishwasher and they stay looking new for longer. Although I don't scrub down my sink every day, I do like to do it as often as possible as grime tends to accumulate, especially in the corners and on the grill that goes at the bottom of the sink. So I just use a little barkeeper's friend to help me scrub everything down and make it nice and shiny. And of course, I always make sure to get rid of any water that's sitting on the countertop or around the faucet, as this can ruin the finish on the counters and on the sink as well. One of the tasks I had neglected was upkeeping the surface of the cabinets, and so I figured I would take a few minutes and finally tackle this. I do love the shaker style of our cabinets, but they do accumulate dust and grime from using the kitchen every day. And so I just sprayed it with my general cleaner, which is part water, a little bit of dish soap, and some hydrogen peroxide. And so I sprayed everything down and wiped it with my rag. I even took out my stepladder to get above the hood fan, and it was surprising how much dust had accumulated up there. My rag was dark gray, so I had to wash it out in between uses. It amazes me what a difference it makes when you take the time to clean these areas such as the kitchen cabinets and the baseboards where dust accumulates and it doesn't necessarily look dirty, but once you've cleaned it, then you can go back and really see that, oh wow, maybe it did look dirtier than I thought. And I just find when you get rid of those dusty areas, like for example, like the baseboards, the whole house instantly brightens up. And then I moved on to wiping down the island as well. And I noticed there was quite a few chips on the paint. So I figured since the cabinets were nice and clean, it would be the perfect opportunity to touch up those areas with a little bit of paint. I have this little paint canister that matches the island paint, and I simply use it every once in a while to touch up the island. And I should have shaken the can because the paint and oil had separated a little bit, but I was able to stir it back in, which worked out great. With a tiny little brush, I can then go in and then I can fill in all those little nicks that are around the island. And then when I'm done using the paint, I can simply seal it back with a little saran wrap, and I close the lid really well. I usually bang on it with a knife or a screwdriver or something hard that I can make sure it's sealed really nicely. The next day, it was time to tackle all the laundry that had accumulated over the last few days. I had maybe 3 or 4 loads that I hadn't had time to fold, and this happens once in a while, but I usually like to fold my laundry before washing another load, just because I know otherwise it will just accumulate, and then I have piles of clothes throughout the house and it just becomes a mess. This is what happened. Life got in the way, and so I had done a few loads of laundry, and so I was paying for it now. I had a pile that was sky high. On a happy note though, when I have such a high pile of clothes, I have an elevated folding surface, which makes it easier on my back. I always try to be a glass half full kind of person, and I also don't mind folding clothes as it gives me an opportunity to listen to some podcasts or catch up on any videos that I have been meaning to watch on YouTube. I have a never-ending list of videos that I add to my watch later playlist, and I don't often get around to it, so this was a good opportunity for that. When the kids were younger, I had started folding their PJs together this way so I don't lose the top and the bottom, and so I've kind of stuck with that way of folding their pajamas. So I'll put the pants within the shirt and fold everything together. When it comes time to folding jeans or pants, I will fold them in half and then half again to make a nice little pile of our pants. I've also had these little washcloths since the kids were babies, and I still use them on a daily basis to wash their faces with warm water in the morning. I took a little break from folding clothes to check on my sourdough bread. It had time to rest for about 30 minutes, and it was time to do the first series of tuck and folds. Instead of stretch and folds, I've started tucking the bread under and kind of rotating it that way. I've modified how I make my sourdough bread in the last little bit, so I'm thinking I might make a new video on how I make my bread if you guys are interested in that. After the first tuck and fold session, I will leave the dough to rest for another 45 minutes and then repeat this process for another 2 times. Then back to folding laundry and putting it away. I like to make these little piles of clothes for each member of the family, and then I can just grab the piles and put them in the appropriate room. After dealing with the laundry, it was time to tackle the washrooms. And I always start by squeezing some soap into the toilet bowl and then spraying it down from the very top down to the floor. And so I want to make sure all of that area is nice and clean. And then this gives the hydrogen peroxide that's in the cleaning solution in my spray bottle time to do its thing and disinfect while I clean the inside of the bowl, and then I use a paper towel to wipe everything down, and then I'll start from the top and wipe everything down to the floor and around the toilet as well. If you're using a toilet brush, it's also a good idea to hang it off the side of the toilet, and then that way it can drip dry into the bowl before placing it back into its holder. Next is the vanity and the sinks, and I noticed that some grime had accumulated around the drain, and so I unscrewed the stopper and made sure to clean that area with a toothbrush that I have dedicated just for cleaning. And it's also a good way to see if anything's clogging the drain, and then you could take the time to clear that out as well. For my mirrors, I just use straight vinegar and I feel like it cleans really well. If you find that your mirrors are still streaky even with using vinegar, it might be the paper towel that you're using. It might be leaving a residue. I have these magic microfiber cloths that I use, and they're amazing for this, and they don't leave any streaks. I'll link them down below for you guys. And when you first buy them and they're dry, they're really stiff. But once you wet them, they're just like a regular washcloth, and they're really good at wiping everything down, and then they don't leave any streaks. Then it was time to check in on how my sourdough bread was doing, and it had doubled in size after those 3 tuck and fold sessions. And so I took it out and I put it on the counter, divided it into 2, and proceeded to shape it. I then placed it into another bowl with some parchment paper where it can proof overnight in the fridge, and then the next day I can simply lift the dough with the parchment paper and place it into the preheated Dutch oven for it to bake. The next day I started by making the beds, which I try to do every day if possible because it makes such a difference. It's such an instant boost for the house, and the house instantly looks more tidy and put together, and so I try to make the beds every day. But life happens again, and sometimes I don't get around to it, so that's what homemaking is about, I guess. You do the best you can, and you can't be too hard on yourself because unexpected things come up. There's work and then there's other responsibilities, so I try to remind myself of this as well, that you just can't be too hard on yourself. We all live in our houses, so they can't be picture perfect all the time, as much as I would love that, but it's just not realistic. After making the beds, I started to vacuum, and if possible, I usually like to vacuum starting upstairs before moving down to the main floor. And today I actually only had time to vacuum upstairs before having to head out for some appointments and errands, and I wasn't able to continue vacuuming until later on in the day, until after I had picked up the kids from school. And that's what I've come to realize with being a homemaker. Having kids, life happens, and it's not possible to have the expectation that you'll be able to finish all your cleaning all at once and then have that perfect house all the time, especially when kids are involved. To be honest, I sometimes feel that I'm constantly cleaning, but I do try to think of it in a different way, where I look at it as a blessing that I have such a beautiful home and a family that gets to live in this home. It can get overwhelming some days, but I think this is where systems come into play. They help you streamline things a little bit. For example, I kind of have as a rule that I like to clear the kitchen sink and wipe down the counters every night, so then in the morning I can start with a clean slate and I'm not starting my day being overwhelmed and trying to catch up with things that were left from the day before. It was close to dinner time, and so I placed the Dutch oven in the oven to preheat while I finished vacuuming the house. When I finished vacuuming, the oven was hot enough for me to bake the bread, and I thought I would make a little design on the dough. I'm not an expert at scoring, but I always keep experimenting, hoping one day the design will come out just like you see in those fancy sourdough bread videos. After about 40 minutes, dinner was ready, and so was the bread, and so we were able to enjoy hot bread with our dinner. I really hope you enjoyed this week's Clean With Me video and it gave you the motivation you needed to tackle your own home. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next week.